Senator Coons, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to each of you for being here. Mr. Glau, I want to come to you first. Senator Coons was just talking about targeting the right, putting the focus where it should be. Now, in Tennessee, we make automobiles. And there are some that want to sue the automakers because they say automakers should be able to make it harder to hijack a car. And to me, this sounds a lot like victim blaming. But I'd like for you just to touch on what the effect of some of these proposed lawsuits against automakers and then how that would affect the cost to manufacturers, how it may set up perverse incentives.
Senator, thank you for the question. From NICB's perspective, we are the hub for information sharing. We have a manufacturers working group. We work with the insurance industry and federal, state, and local law enforcement for 100 years. This is what we do. So any impediment for sharing of intelligence or information on stolen vehicles, cars that have been stolen, or any crimes would hurt our mission and hurt the public. So I would say when thoughtful legislation is occurring at the federal or state level, information sharing narrowly scoped for crime information is critical to our mission space and to break down those barriers.
I appreciate that. And, you know, I was struck by the DOJ focus that we have had in their violence reduction strategy on what they call the iron pipeline and gun dealers. And I think this response really misses the mark if we're talking about targeting and we're talking about focusing. And one of the things that we have seen as we've looked at this issue is the way police departments and law enforcement agencies are drained of resources right now, and the way some of these local entities are on this defund the police push. So the other thing that has interested me is the way progressive prosecutors have really come to be in major metropolitan cities and how they're refusing to prosecute some of these criminals. So Chief Garcia, talk a minute about where you are, and then Mr. Herdman, I want to come to you. Let's talk about gun reform and if that's the appropriate path, or is it better to go in and look at the issue of the violent offenders, look at the necessity for lawful gun ownership and the effects that some of these policies have?
Thank you, Senator. What I will say, first of all, that to me, it is the access of firearms to criminals that are not being held accountable. That is my issue. If we're going to strengthen the laws we have on the books, then let's strengthen it so that we have responsible gun ownership, that we have safe stored guns. But ultimately, again, it's the criminal access to firearms that's the issue.
Okay, Mr. Herdman.
I couldn't agree more, Senator. We took a very offender-based approach in the Justice Department when I was U.S. Attorney, and I think that that's the appropriate way to approach this problem. You have individuals who are not only in possession illegally of a firearm, but they've demonstrated through their history and through their prior conduct that they're willing to engage in violent activity against their fellow residents of their city. So I think the offender-based approach is the only one that really works, because those are the people that we have to be concerned about, the ones who are willing not only to possess a firearm illegally, but to use it. And you have to have a strategy that's going to address that threat.
I think you're right about that. And then you look at some of these liberal prosecutors, and I hear from a lot of women who are very concerned about people like Chesa Bowden and Gascon, and the fact that you have these violent offenders that end up back on the streets. And they're concerned about the Biden administration doubling down on a soft on crime strategy and what they see coming from people like Rachel Rollins, who declined to prosecute 15 different crimes as a matter of policy. And as a U.S. attorney from Massachusetts, and just last week we had a nominee for the Eastern District of New York, who has publicly applauded the progressive prosecutor movement. And that's unfortunate for the people of New York because that individual may end up on the federal bench. So, Mr. Herdman, what kind of internal reform do we need to see as for our district attorneys and U.S. attorneys across the country so that they are addressing this rise in violent crime?
I've been a lawyer for over 20 years, Senator, and most of that has been spent as a prosecutor, either a state or federal prosecutor. And the one thing that I thought was the most important part of my job was not to act as a legislator when I was in that role. I was very aware of the fact that I was part of the executive branch. It was my job to carry out the law that was given to us by the legislature and that had been approved by the courts. That was the attitude that I had when I was U.S. Attorney. That was the approach that we took when we prosecuted cases out of the Northern District of Ohio when I was U.S. Attorney. And I think that's the most fundamental obligation you have as a prosecutor, is to prosecute the law that's given to you, not to try to legislate from your office.
And that is important for us to keep in mind as we look at judges and as we look at U.S. attorney nominees. It's important to stay in your lane. Thank you very much. I appreciate your attention. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.